Thank you. So what I'm going to do is Dan and I are obviously going to talk about the roadmap for creating a highly engaged workforce. And what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the OpX Leadership Network and what we do, and then a brief overview of the engagement framework, and then reserve most of the time for Dan so he can talk about a case study that we're currently doing in his facility. So first, who is the OpX Leadership Network? It's a dynamic group of manufacturing and engineering professionals in operations, primarily CPG. We have 170 companies in our OpX Leadership Network. And what we're doing is we're working on best practices and items that we can then solve industry issues and then bring that back to industry. And so best practices come out in the form of white papers and other types of information, and you can find that on the website, opxleadershipnetwork.org. So that's where all of our work products go. But the key is, this is a collaborative effort across 170 companies and growing. So what have we done thus far? Well, we work in the areas of people, process, and technology. And we have 11 subgroups, as you can see. And out of these 11 subgroups, so far we have a total of 7 white papers that have been published. We have white papers in sustainability, product safety, engineering, total cost of ownership, and then today, what Dan and I are going to talk about, workforce engagement. So the OpX Leadership Network, I encourage you, if you're not participating or haven't been on the site, please check it out. There's lots of information, and we'd love to have your feedback, and if you so choose, it'd be great to have you participate as well. So let's talk about the engagement framework, and let's start with some statistics. I'm going to give you 4 numbers to tell you what is important about engagement. First and foremost, Dale Carnegie estimates that there is $11 billion of lost productivity due to turnover. Think about it. If you have your best people in your organization that don't feel valued or don't feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves, and then they decide to leave, all that knowledge and information goes with them. We can't afford to lose our best people. So turnover is huge. If you look at Gallup, Gallup estimates that there's about 450 to 550 billion with a B, dollars lost in productivity due to a lack of engagement. So that's a big number. If you look at Dale Carnegie, they estimate that those companies that have highly engaged employees outperform those that don't by over 200%. And then finally, if you look at some information from Towers Watson, Towers Watson shows that those companies that have high sustained engagement, they tend to outperform those companies that have low engagement by up to 3x in operating profit. Now I've seen numbers that are 2, 2.5, and 3x, but I think we can all agree that that is a tremendous amount of value. So those are the numbers. Let's start to look at the framework itself. Well, before we go there, one more thing to reflect upon. Jim Clifton at Gallup said, if your company reflects the average in the US, just imagine what poor management and disengagement are costing your bottom line. So clearly, there's a significant value there. So let's look at the engagement framework. We brought together a diverse group of leaders back in 2012. So over 3 years ago, we pulled all these leaders together that had experience across a number of different companies, had experience across a number of different functions, but what they all had done was they had led transformations, they had built engagement, they had led high-performance work systems. So we pulled these people together, and the key is they're practitioners. These are people that actually worked in the environment. We like to say they made the magic happen. This isn't an academic study. This isn't somebody coming in and analyzing a company that's already good and saying, oh, here's what they do. These are people that actually made the transformation happen. And so the objective was, we wanted these leaders to codify what it was that made their organization special, and why could they do it over and over and replicate it. So that was the objective. As I mentioned, we published the white paper this year, so in 2015 it's available for download. So again, looking at engagement, what this group had to do is define the conditions to create an environment to allow and support engagement. And that's pretty important because it's not a program, it's not something you push into the organization. You have to allow it, you have to create the conditions. So what you're doing is you're allowing people to make the choice to become engaged. I can't motivate anyone, no one in this room can motivate anyone, but what we can do is remove the barriers that allow someone to say, you know what, I'm not going to do it. But if I pull that barrier away, then they can make the choice to become engaged. So again, remember it's a choice. It's not a program. So when you look at the framework, it provides a roadmap. And that's what Dan and his team are using it for. It's a roadmap telling them how to get from point A to point B and build their culture. The group now is starting to work on the diagnostic. So we're formalizing the diagnostic. So it's both a roadmap and a diagnostic. So now if we're going to create engagement, we have to define what is engagement. We have to understand what it is we're trying to build. So this team worked very hard to come up with a definition. And so engagement is a high degree of emotional attachment, intellectual commitment, and behavioral actions. That means we're engaging the mind, the hands, the person's heart, the whole person. And what does that create? That creates ownership, and then the outcome. It generates individual, team, and organizational performance. So again, that's what engagement is. So now let's briefly look at the framework, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dan. So again, we're trying to create engagement. If you want to make sure you understand the definition in just 2 words, it's discretionary effort. How do I convince someone or allow them to make that choice? Now, if we think about the engagement framework, there are 3 foundational elements. The first is leadership. Leadership is a prerequisite to all other components of the framework. If you don't have leadership, you shouldn't move forward. And the team worked very hard to understand what is this type of leadership. And we all agree that there are many, many different styles of leadership, many, many different types of leadership. But what we found is the leadership that was most effective was the servant leader. That person that puts team before self. They're a coach, mentor, facilitator. They provide resources, but yet they're also willing to hold accountability. So what do? They build trust. So that's the type of leader that really solidifies the foundation. If you don't have a leader that is capable or willing to change, then we would not recommend you go forward. The next important criteria are values. We all have values in our company. But the reason values are so important is it allows 2-way accountability. It allows leaders obviously can hold accountability in one direction because it's power of position. But what this does is it allows everyone in the organization to hold peers accountable as well as hold accountability up. And there's another clue of the type of leader you need, someone who will take feedback and someone who will action according to the values. Now when you think about values, we all have a poster hanging on the wall, and then we have the way things are really done in our organization. So the leader has to make sure that they bring those 2 value sets together. So the way things happen in the organization and the poster have got to be laser aligned, or again, it'll fall apart. The third and final piece is the mission, vision, and purpose. Now, this isn't about a purpose of a company saying, let's increase shareholder value. Because I think we all know 99.9% of the people in our company really don't care about shareholder value. What do we all want? We want to do something bigger than ourselves. We want to be part of something big, something important. And that's what the mission, vision, and purpose does. It allows us to translate what the company's doing all the way down to the individual level, and that starts to build emotional equity. So the purpose is very important. So now if you have a strong foundation, you can begin to move forward, and there are 47 elements in the framework. So let's look at the elements, and as I said, then Dan will talk about his case study. So first of all, there's empowerment. If I want to create engagement, I need to empower someone. And so what does that look like? What does it mean? Well, it means that they have the desire to do what they're doing, as well as I'm giving them authority. And so if you break it down into the elements, first is under desire. It's meaningful work. Am I contributing to something that's important? It's team contribution, recognition. When you think about recognition, this isn't about gift cards and incentive programs. The best recognition we can give someone is if they're doing a great job, we give them the opportunity to improve themselves from an education view. Maybe they benchmark other companies, they represent your company somewhere, or at a minimum, it's just the gift of time. Someone in a leadership position to come out and authentically thank them for what they're doing, a handwritten note. That's how we can start to build that emotional equity. Authority, pretty straightforward. To take responsibility myself. Are you telling me what to do, or do you trust me to do my job? And then we can go through the whole list, to hold accountability of self and others, to make decisions, to lead, to make a difference, to give input and challenge the cultural norm. Those all fall under authority. So now if I have someone or a team that's empowered, the next thing I need to do is I need to enable them. And so what does enablement mean? It means they have the requisite skills to perform a duty or a task, and then they have the resources. So if we break those down, first of all, there's the functional skills or the capabilities. We're all very aware of these. That's the technical skill set, management skills, communication skills. We always work in these areas and we always think about them. But then there's another set of skills that we often disregard. That's the interpersonal skills or responses. Those are things such as perceptiveness, self-awareness, collaborative thinking, adaptability. Think about how industry and our businesses are changing so rapidly. We need to build the skill set of how to adapt within our teams. We actually had a member on our team who was a career HR leader. She has a degree in psychology and really had a network into the cognitive therapy world. And that's how we all began to understand that these are skills, they're not character traits. So we as companies often neglect that as an opportunity to build the skills within our teams. Resources, tools. We're very familiar with the tools. There's the processes, Lean Six Sigma, TPM, DMAIC. All of those processes live in that box. Those processes can often be used as vehicles for culture change. It's not about do the process, get a result. It's use the process to build our team's acumen, build their teamwork, build their skills, and then the outcome is performance. Then there's provisions, time and money, information, and so forth. Now if I have someone that's empowered and enabled, they can do something, but they can't add value until I do one more thing. I need to connect them to the organization. And how do I connect them? First of all, fit. Are they in the right fit? Secondly, communication. And this isn't the skill of communication. This is the infrastructure for information flow. So let's break these down. Fit. It's about role, interest, recruitment, team orientation, even assimilation. Think about someone new in your organization. When they come in, if you kick them out in the organization, you may have disengaged them from minute one. How do you bring them up to speed in your organization and make them feel valued from day one? Again, a key to engagement. Then on the communication side, there's the inspirational vision. The inspirational vision is anchored down into the foundation under purpose. And then as we continue to break it down, there's strategic plans, state of the business, performance meetings, metrics, KPIs, all the way down to standard operating procedures, standard work. So this is the overview of the framework and all the elements we need to think about in our organizations that can either be a barrier or a support to allowing someone to become engaged. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk to you about a case study. Dan is currently the Vice President at Sugar Creek, and they're opening a greenfield plant in Cambridge, Indiana. And Dan can talk to you about how they're not bringing jobs to Indiana. What Dan and his team are doing is they're bringing careers to Indiana. So Dan.
Thanks, Greg. Can you all hear me? Okay, this is the engaged portion of the session here. That group over there is way smaller than you. Show Greg some love. Come on. One way to get engagement. Okay, so I have to use the paper. Normally I don't use the paper, but Greg says I got to tie back all my stories, and that's what I'm going to do, is tell you stories back to the model and how they fit into the model. But real quickly, a little history about Sugar Creek. It is not a young company. We make bacon. Anybody like bacon? Yeah, there's that engagement again, right? So we've been around for 49 years. Our owner is the original owner's son. And bacon's been very good to him. He bought the company back in the 90s and the revenue at that time was in the 40 millions. We're at 650 million revenue right now. So not a small company. He's opening 2 plants this year. This is the second plant that he's opening. And so he looked at it and said, you know, bacon's been very, very good to me, but I need to do something different. I need to diversify my portfolio. So this plant's making no bacon. It's all new and different processes. So he also looked at some of the other technology and he said, I want that different. The size of the facility is different. So he wanted to put in some disruptive technology, disruptive change. With the workforce, he said, well, we're very traditional. And I'll tell you how traditional a couple of the stories. I know you. But we've turned around. He said he wanted disruptive evolution. He wanted to evolve the workforce, do something different. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, okay? So where do we start? Make sure I get this right. There we go. At the beginning, okay? The beginning of the race. And it sounds trite and it sounds funny, but it's the reality. You got to start at the beginning. Greg talked about the framework and that base, okay? I joined Sugar Creek 10 months ago. Okay? 10 months, not a long time to be there. The moment I walked in the door, the facility was going to start up in July. I had 2 VPs and the CIO going, you need to hire, you need to hire, you need to hire. And the first thing I said, what am I hiring for? What are you going to hire for? We have to develop something first. Sugar Creek had talked about their mission, vision, purpose, and they had talked about their values, but they never wrote them down. So I spent some time helping put those together, and we could talk about that. The other thing that when I walked in, the owner had absolute trust in me. Wasn't necessarily sure how an engaged workforce worked, but he said, Dan, we're going down this journey, we're going together, just let me know what you need and why you're doing it. And that's the big thing. You need to engage your leadership in the why, just like you need to engage your employees. It's not just about them on the floor, it's more about us. Okay? And so he has not said no to anything right now. The very first thing I asked for, no time clocks. Okay? Now some of those in bigger corporations have seen that before, but think about in most of your organizations, you walk in and say, I don't want a time clock in the facility. Well, how the heck are you going to track their time? You ever heard of this thing called trust? Okay? There are processes we can put in place around FLSA and those types of things to make sure that it works, but the people in that facility, and there's 50 of us so far, there's no time clocks. Okay? And we make it work. And they trust it. And by the way, the teams asked us, okay, we actually started hiring them in March. The teams have already asked us to have one person leave because they violated the time clock rule. So think about when your teams are that engaged that they're asking for people to go away because they're stealing from the company. Okay? All right. So then we had to take some more steps. I just became a grandfather not so long ago. I enjoyed putting that one together. So first steps. We needed to talk about the values and the mission, vision, purpose, but really those values. And I talked about the trustworthiness. That was the one word in the 2014 annual report that was missing. Everything else had all those other words in it. And we could easily create it without the trust aspect. So we needed to make sure we had those conversations. We moved that forward. Okay? Not going to spend a lot of time on that. We got some stories to get to. The next thing we did is say, so what are we building here? And this was all done before we hired person 1. I started with 2 employees, 2 managers in Sugar Creek that knew they were going to come up to a facility that's 418,000 square feet, and 1 offer out for a quality manager. Okay, that's all we had, and nobody had more than 2 years seniority in Sugar Creek because we didn't want to bring the old culture over with the new. We wanted to start and get underway from Doc the right way. So we then put together a very simplified matrix. You're not supposed to read this, but it really talked to people about the fact that they were going to have careers. I could go to the Chamber of Commerce, I could go to the workforce development in the area, and I could talk to them and say, look, if you're standing on the outside of this model, not only do you see that you've got a career for 10 or 15 years, you'll know what everybody's making. None of this, hey, I like you better, I'm going to give you $2 more an hour. I don't like you, I'm taking $1 away. Okay, that doesn't develop trust. And so they know what everybody's making based upon skill acquisition. Okay? Then we had to take that and bounce it against Maslow. How many remember Maslow from school? Okay? It really works. Okay? So quick story. Survival and security, when we started looking at in Sugar Creek what was going on, our Dayton facility felt really good. They had cut their attrition rate in half. Remember the 11 billion that Greg talked about? They cut their attrition rate in half, and they got it down to 80%. Pretty cool, huh? 80% attrition. Now think about at the lowest levels, because you typically retain people at the higher levels a little better. That means they were turning those people 2 and 3 times a year. How do you get skills developed in those types of things? So what we were trying to develop was something that would have a 5 to 7% attrition rate. That's what an empowered workforce will deliver you. Okay? So we really talked about that. We talked about security. Sugar Creek didn't want to use temps. They said, we don't want to use temps, there's quality issues. We make proteins, bacon, chicken, steaks, all that type of stuff. I said, great. My quality manager called me up from Dayton. She says, Dan, we can't use temps. Why? Well, the quality people said we can't because customers don't like it. I said, what's the attrition rate at Dayton? 80%. And I said, you don't think those people are temps? Right? They are temps. How do you get our folks engaged to stay? And so we can really talk about it and say, hey, if I know that I have a cyclical business and every July I'm laying off 90 people and my seniority is I'm number 89, What's going to happen the first time somebody offers me a job that's steady? I'm gone. If I'm making $10.50 an hour and all I'm moving is bacon slab from one place to another for the next 20 years, that's all I'm knowing, and somebody offers me $10.75, I'm going to go because I want to take care of my family. This model takes care of that. And we're even driving it to the next level now, so when we talk about the temporaries, we're talking about how do we have security for the temporaries and who can we partner with in the local community that has a different cycle than us so that we can keep those people employed as well. You don't think the community is excited about that, right? They can see what we're trying to do. Okay. Like I said, I'm a storyteller, okay? And I'm going to tell you a couple stories about what's happened. We started running in July, so we haven't been doing this very long, okay? First 5 people we hired were maintenance technicians, high-level maintenance technicians, okay? One of the first things I asked them to do was go clean and sweep out a room, or actually a series of 3 rooms we were going to put a line in, and I can say, because it's running now, we're making Spam snacks. Dehydrated Spam for Hormel. Right? So, but I said to them, hey, you guys, can we get that room clean? They spent a day and a half with brooms, and they swept it up, and they cleaned it up. These are high-level maintenance technicians. By the way, we won't have an offline maintenance group. They're actually embedded in the line. They actually run equipment. Because when equipment breaks, I don't need to have somebody sitting offline, putting on their cape, flying in, fixing it, flying back to go have their cup of coffee, right? They're embedded in the line, all right? So I said to them, go ahead and clean the room. Now I said, hey, you've got skills. Why don't you take some blue tape, take the layout of the line for Spam Snacks, and lay it out on the floor? They can do that. They had those skills, and they did. Anybody want to guess how many pages of follow-ups we had because it wasn't going to work, flow wasn't going to work? It's a very simple lean tool. 4 pages of follow-ups. We had to go back to Hormel and say, your flow doesn't work well. We want to make sure you get the best out of us, work with us. And we did that, okay? Then, about 6-8 weeks later, the equipment comes in. The engineers are starting to place it on the floor. They've taken all our suggestions after a little bit of whining. Engineers whine occasionally. We got any of those around here? Okay, they whine a little bit. And the first thing they came back, my guys came back to me and said, Dan, you know, we didn't just see all the bump outs for the motors and the gearboxes and all that, and there's 4 pieces of equipment out there that won't work. We got to roll things around, it won't work. I said, well, move the equipment. You want to see engineers whine? Tell technicians to start moving equipment. And they did. We hadn't dropped the ladders yet from the ceiling, so we had no power or anything to them. They moved it to where they needed to move it, and the flow on that line was much better, and we far exceeded the Hormel startup that they expected. Do you think those people were engaged? Do you think they're empowered? Do you think they own that line? Okay? Those are stories where you can use people to go. I went out and questioned a couple times, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I never said no. I always said, why are you doing that? They had to think through the process. And occasionally after a question, if I'm good enough, they'll change their mind. Sometimes we got to let them fail forward. You ever heard of that? How many of your bosses let you fail forward? Right? A lot of times, you're scared to death of failing. We've got to allow people to fail forward. So this is where I got to look at my paper, because in that one, Greg, we hit meaningful work, recognition, make a difference, take action, technical capability, and customer requirements. Okay? So I knew I had to for a reason. Okay. I'm doing good, right? Okay. Next one is overtime and vacation. Again, Sugar Creek is very traditional. It's not bad. They've grown the company like a weed. That's why we're calling it evolution versus disruptive change. It's disruptive evolution. But they have some very archaic systems around vacation. If I want to take vacation, I have to fill out a form. I have to send it off to HR and payroll. They have to make sure that I've earned enough hours to be able to take that vacation. They sign off on it. They send it back to me. I send it back to the owner because he's my boss. He signs off on it, sends it back to me, that I'm allowed to take vacation. Any muda or waste in that process? Just a tad, okay? So these guys said, hey, Dan, we want to be able to come and take vacation. I said, great, design a process. Give me time-based standard work that allows you to figure out 8 out of 10 times the least waste way to schedule your vacation. The first time they came back, they had to go back to the drawing board. Second time, back to the drawing board. Asked a lot of questions. How are you going to do this? You don't have 2 hours a day to discuss vacation. And we went through that. And the third time, they got it. And they came back and were able to put together a process where they could very quickly schedule their vacation and not one manager looks at it. The teams manage the vacation. We talked a little bit about trust. Same thing with overtime. Okay? So 3 times they had to go back, and it's not a bad thing. It was coaching, and each time they learned something new, and nobody got beat up. They were failing forward, and they learned a process to be able to schedule their overtime. And they know how to force people. If nobody wants the overtime, they know how to select if everybody wants the overtime when it's that good double time, right? So they know how to do all of that with no management involvement. In fact, we weren't ready when we needed to do our first cook for American Airlines steaks, and we had a small pilot plant down in Cincinnati. These guys figured out how to staff the process on overtime, 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, for 2 weeks with no involvement from management. And they came back and said, Dan, it's an hour-and-a-half drive for us. Can you get a couple rooms in case we want to stay and come? Sure, we can do that. They came back 5 days later and said, Dan, that wasn't really a good idea. Why don't you cancel the rooms and let's save the company some money? Do you want your people on the floor thinking that way for you? Okay, those are the stories. So let me see, which one did I hit this time, Greg? Take responsibility and hold accountable, challenge cultural norms, be flexible in standard work. The last one I'll talk about is team meetings, because I know I'm boring you guys here, but we'll get through this quickly. We started with team meetings. Sugar Creek hadn't done team meetings before. They had management meetings where managers talked to supervisors, supervisors talked to people on the floor. They didn't have a conversation, they talked at them, okay? What do you think engagement is like in a traditional work system like that, okay? We have team meetings. When the teams get in there, I'm invited to their team meeting. I can go to their team meetings. I only go once or twice a week. I'm too disruptive. But they come back, and they'll talk about the KPIs for yesterday. How did they do? What do they need to do to win today? What issues do they see coming up? And they've got that process. And if you went and looked at their boards right now, you'd say, Dan, they really look awful. They're pieces of paper on a wall. They're not pretty and all that. I don't care about pretty. I care about, can they use the data to drive the business forward? And that's what they're doing. And they actually said, you know, we're up in this team room. We're a meat processing facility, protein processing facility. We've got to be careful about where we have people meet, because you have ready to eat and you have raw, and it's hard to combine the two and all that. They figured out a way to get that process much closer to the Don and Doff areas so that they weren't wasting time in a team room. Nobody asked them to do that. They did that on their own. They said, hey, we could start up the lines faster if we did that. With a little bit of coaching, a little bit of help, that's the type of stuff that your people can be doing. We started in July. It's the end of September. We have a long way to go, okay? Our graphs aren't pretty. We haven't got all of our stuff in place yet, but we will get there, okay? Don't force it at them. Engage them. Let them walk the journey with you, okay? So with that, I think I'm supposed to end with a couple slides. How am I doing on time? Did I mess up? Oh, okay. The hook is up here, okay? So a little bit about, again, what Greg started up with, okay? So where can you go get this stuff? You can download this white paper along with a bunch of others on opxleadershipnetwork.org. It's free. Why wouldn't you take advantage of it? And we talk about OE, and we talk about sustainability, and we talk about total cost of ownership, and we're working on factory acceptance tests. It's all that type of stuff. What a great place for you to go and get some information, okay? As Greg talked, we're working on the 47-element diagnostics. The tool itself is good enough to almost be a diagnostic now. You could use it. It's 79 pages long, so it's a little cumbersome for that. But you can use it. My folks are already holding me accountable to that, okay? Adoption tools. We would love for you guys to pick it up and take it at no cost to us. We're not selling anything. We want to be able to have these conversations with you and be energized with each other about how we're moving our workforce forward and how we're making lives better. Isn't it kind of cool when you can go home and you're making something, but you've also made somebody's life better? Okay? All right, we're moving operational excellence forward. There is a booth over to my right, to your left, okay? 1461. We got total cost of ownership and FAT presentations tomorrow and Wednesday. And I'm done. The hook is out.